Hi, I'm Chris Van Vechten. I'm running for Tacoma City Council in District 3. I'm a criminal defense attorney with a public defender contract. My wife Jen and I live just up there on 9th and Cushman. She's a healthcare professional, and we're raising a 7-year-old named Zarina, who's already decided this is where she wants to spend the rest of her life. We want to make sure that life is worth living in Tacoma. Today, we're going to be riding Pierce Transit line number 28. Well, in District 3, it always comes down to equity. And I've spent the past 9+ years as a public defender. And about 85 to 91% of the people who come through the criminal justice system are found to be indigent, which in Tacoma before the pandemic meant that they made $2,000 a month or less. And frankly, these are people who live in worlds that are defined by having the best of the worst of things and the worst of the best of things. And that includes access to transportation systems. And I've been to their homes, their apartments, their trailers, their tents. These are neighborhoods that have the worst streets, the worst sidewalks, subpar access to public transit, and the end result of that is that a lot of my clients, in fact even the poorest of my clients I would say, have to rely on a car even to do something as basic as get to court. And that means having to scrounge up gas money they don't necessarily have, having to pray that there's enough juice in the car just to make it to court so they don't catch a warrant. And I can't tell you how many times over my career I've had to pick someone up from the side of the road when that gas money came up short. From my perspective, I'm not quite sure why the city would need to spend so much money on consultants to find disparity when law enforcement is able to do it without those consultants. I think if we just assume that where people are getting arrested, that is where investment needs to be made on a host of issues, including transportation, including road infrastructure, sidewalk infrastructure, bike lanes, what have you. So when I started out my legal career, I was actually a prosecutor. From 2011 to 2013, I started off in the Thurston County Prosecutor's Office and then the City of Lakewood. And like all rookies, my first job was traffic citation enforcement, followed by traffic misdemeanor enforcement like DUIs, driving while license suspended, reckless driving, etc. And then in 2014, I switched sides and became a criminal defense attorney. Based on those experiences, I would have to say that I think that there's only so much we can do through policing, whether that be citation or incarceration, to get us to Vision Zero. And there's quite frankly a lot of injustices that can follow that path. For some people a speeding ticket just means that their insurance rates go up. For other people it means they lose their CDL, their commercial driver's license. They lose their job as a trucker, and now their family's housing insecure. And furthermore, I think that any desire to use policing as an effort to get us to Vision Zero is going to fail given some of the changes that came out of the legislature in 2021 that just went into effect this year. The most notable of which is that failure to pay a traffic citation will no longer lead to the suspension of a driver's license, which begs the question, well then what is the point of issuing a citation? And to be completely honest, the most dangerous drivers were always those who didn't care whether they had a license or not. So I think what we have to figure out here is what alternatives to what we traditionally used, and keep in mind what we traditionally used wouldn't have brought us to Vision Zero anyways, is what sort of infrastructure investments we can make, what sort of proven safety countermeasures we can employ. But I think honestly, one other thing we need to think about when we address this is addressing the homeless crisis. Because last year in Seattle, I think 27% of all pedestrian collisions took place with unhoused populations. I'm willing to bet we had similar numbers in Tacoma, if not worse. And as a public defender, I can tell you I've lost track of how many of my clients have been hit by cars over the years, stumbling into the street at night. So what we need is we need to move people into stable housing and into hope through public-private partnerships that promote both innovation and pragmatism of the idea. Continuing a hands-off approach to homelessness is neither going to be proving to be humane or effective, as exemplified by the sheer number of people who are getting hit by cars, among other issues. Yeah, well, I'm inclined to do so. For obvious reasons, Sound Transit needs more revenue, and I think it's been more than 10 years since they've even been on the ballot. And we have projected growth in this community that is going to require investment in transit to make it smart growth. But candidly, it is a complex issue. Tacoma already has the highest sales tax of any city in the United States, and that's something we need to be cognizant of. Ridership is down since the pandemic began, and we haven't quite bounced back yet. There are safety concerns about experiencing, life on the bus. There's employers who have prejudices against transit that are things we need to navigate as well. But on the other hand, gas prices are higher now than they've ever been, and they're getting higher. It's possible to incentivize employers to, make bus transit and other forms of public transportation, a priority for their workforce. And there are other things that make this a priority. So the question is, can we come up with a ballot initiative that the public will trust? Because it comes down to people are willing to pay more in taxes if they feel they are getting more out of it. And so if we can earn the voters' trust, if we can come together with a package that will show this time it's different, then yeah, I'm inclined to support it, but we want it to succeed. Yeah. So I think when we all found out that the link was coming to MLK, we were all really excited. But candidly, that project had some issues, and at a certain point, many people started wondering, is it really worth it? And now that it's finally getting open, I think that people are going to forget and forgive. But going forward, as we think about link expansion now to TCC, I'd like for us to start imagining how we can do this project in a way that has a more positive impact on the community and on the business community, recognizing that there's always going to be problems and we need to get people prepared for that, and making sure that the burden doesn't just fall on the people who are living in the area that's under construction. But I think the broader issue is that we need to develop sub-area plans for neighborhoods before we make major transit investments. If nothing else, it's my understanding that that makes us more competitive when applying for both state and federal grant funding. Yeah, in fact, we had a conversation on the bus about e-bikes. This is a program that Downtown on the Go should go help me advocate for. This is a program I stole from Nelson, British Columbia. And in Nelson, BC, the city will give you a loan of up to $8,000 towards the purchase of an e-bike. They have very fast ones there, including ones that go as fast as 45 miles per hour. And it's charged at 3.5% interest, but you pay it back through your electric bill, through your publicly owned electric bill. And so you pay it off over many years. It's an easy thing to do. It makes this accessible for people who are low income. As I said, equity is always the biggest issue in D3. And Nelson, British Columbia has a topography that's a lot like Tacoma. It's big, hilly, it's on the big water source. And I've been there, I've seen that, this is a place where the car is not as prominent as it is in Tacoma. The only requirement of this program is that you have to be a homeowner in the city, and you have to make the purchase at a local retailer in the city. So I feel like this is a project that could get a lot of people excited. And I'd like to spearhead it on the city council and work with groups like Downtown on the Go to make it happen.
I haven't heard of this one. Neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the financing stuff is, especially with like if we want to get people out of cars, electric cargo bikes are going to be
A what?
Electric cargo bikes. That's going to be how we do it, in my opinion, and they're expensive.
Yeah, well, 8,000 Canadian for this thing, but they are fast. I hope they have a better battery than what you and I have experienced. But it was just shocking to see, and granted it's a smaller city than us by far, maybe 30, 40,000 people, but it was hilly like this. It has similar weather, and yet maybe a fourth of the population was out using their bikes as opposed to a car to get around. Whereas, I mean, I could sit here for an hour and I don't think I would see a bike of any species coming through here. So they've figured it out over there.
Got scooters.
What? Oh crap! As I said on camera, couldn't see it. Except those two. Let's start over. Let's start over. Next time, that's true. Let's put money on the next one. Yeah, no, but yeah, I mean, we could do better, I guess is what I'm saying. Of course, it comes down to sidewalk infrastructure, it comes down to infrastructure in general. Just because we commit to the bikes doesn't mean we're committing to being cheap, right? This is going to cost money too. But, as we increase density and as we try to move away from, some of the modes of transportation that were killing the planet, this is a good step. And, funnily enough, you know, if 20 years ago you had told me that Tacoma had the potential to be a bike or walkable mobility city, I wouldn't have believed you. I would have thought that's just something who spent too much time in Amsterdam or Copenhagen would have said. But I really think the e-bikes were game changers because, you know, the pedal assist and all that, it makes navigating these hills a lot more manageable. Even people like me in the kind of shape I'm in can do it, right? You know? So I see this as the game changer.